Hello, how you doing, everybody? This is Dan Powers at Sirius Computer Corporation, and we're going to look at a closer look at the TANIUM linear chain. So let's take a look at this. Well, as Tanium is showing, everything they do on their framework is built upon this linear chain, which is a unique architecture and creates a fast and efficient design for your endpoints to talk. So, what exactly is their linear chain? Well, with a Tanium server, and I take a subnet, let's say, what happens is if I ask a question or try to get data, as you're seeing here, instead of every endpoint sending information back, it's going to ask the first system in this chain, and each endpoint on this subnet will turn around and forward it to the next device on that particular subnet, where it reaches the end, and all that collected information gets sent back up to the Tanium server. Okay, I can see how that's kind of efficient, kind of pulls away the need to automatically have a infrastructure, those relay servers. And if you have, like most companies will, you're going to have multiple subnets, multiple networks, and so forth. Tanium will auto build out that linear chain as appropriate in each environment. Now, Tanium does a good job at automatically doing this. Now, of course, you have control over this, and you will have certain situations where you do not want it to build a linear chain, such as VPN subnets, or if someone's working at home, those 192.168.1 type subnets. So you have control over it. But at the end of the day, this is the linear chain. Do not think of it like a peer-to-peer network, definitely more like block chaining. But this is how the linear chain is designed. Now, fear not, if you have a need with an isolated network, you can put in what is called a zone server, and this would be much more like a relay in the big fix world, a site server in SECM, and so forth. So you absolutely can still do that where you need to. And Tanium is flexible enough to meet just about any network complexity. So don't worry about that. The one concern, or the one thing I would say, is if you're a highly secure environment or bank, and maybe you're doing a project with network micro segmentation, that would most likely break your linear chain, and you're either going to have to put an exception in, put a lot of zone servers in, or at the end of the day, you are kind of crippling Tanium as far as its speed and scale. It can still work, but the advantage of Tanium over other such products at that point starts to diminish a little bit. So anyway, I did say it's going to be a closer look. So let's see if we can get our linear chain picture back in, and let's take a closer look at how this actually operates. So we're going to pull off the Tanium server. We're going to bring up just a single linear chain in your network, and we're going to take a look at this. So one of the first things that you may do is get information back, that asset management, what type of hardware you're running, your operating systems, what type of patches you need. In this example, I am going to ask our machines, what is the applications and versions you are running? And we can see this information on the right-hand side. Now, in the legacy environment, what's going to happen, instead of this information forwarded to the next machine in the linear chain, it's actually going to be packaged up and sent back through the legacy architecture up to the system. That 20 lines, and just for the sake of argument, say it equaled 1 KB of data that I had to transfer up to the system. Okay, not a big deal. Of course, in the legacy environments, I would have to repeat this process for every single server out here. So on this particular network, let's say it's about 1K times N, or let's say I had 100 machines on this subnet, it's 1K times 100 devices, means I had to move 100K of information to get this data back up where I could review it. Now, your total number of endpoints is going to be the number of endpoints throughout your entire environment. So if we start looking at this and say the average is 1K, let's say if you had 1,000 endpoints, well, it's going to be about a megabyte. This doesn't seem so bad. 5,000, 5 megabytes, 20,000 endpoints, 20 megabytes, and so on and so forth. what really starts to add up, what you have to think to yourself is a number of endpoints. And remember, I only asked a simple question: what is your installed software? But your endpoint management solution is asking hundreds of questions all day long. What is your patches? What is your software? What is your compliancy? All of these things. So that number is climbing and climbing and climbing at the end of the day. Now, let's take a look at the TANIUM way and leveraging that linear chain. So, same thing, I'm going to ask this machine. It's going to produce, as I said, 20 lines, approximately 1K of information. But instead of going back up to my server, it's going to forward this information and question to the next machine in the list. Now, this machine, right, is going to also ask, well, what software do you have? And in most environments, a lot of that information is going to be the same. Hey, I also have the TANIUM client. I have the same version. So instead of repeating that line, it just says, me too. And this process can go on and on and on, all the way till it gets all the way to the end. Now, we also know not every machine is going to be exactly the same. So let's just say this machine happened to have some extra pieces of software, or even the same version of software, the same software on the machine, but a different version of it. It's going to append it to this. And that process is going to work for every single machine in the chain. And at the end of the day, that data will then be sent up to the TANIUM server at the end of that question. So what does that mean? Well, if we move forward, really what we're saying is by the time it reaches the end of the chain, we are definitely going to change the size of the file. We're not sending every machine a file of 1K, but this size of this file is certainly going to get bigger. But let's also be fair, in most environments, your browsers, your Office, these things are installed pretty consistently around the environment. But let's just say for this simple subnet, I double the amount of information. So now instead of 20 lines, which is mostly duplicate, I doubled the size of this. And now this is 2K of data I am now moving on here. Well, when I expand this out to the rest of your endpoints, I can't just times it now by the number of endpoints, but really what I need to do is say, hey, on average, how many times is this information going to be modified and changed per those linear change? So let's just say we go up to 1,000 unique lines of data, even though that says date, it's data. That's going to equal 50 kilobytes of data that I'm moving around an environment. So think about that. If you had that many endpoints before, that information equaled about 20 megabytes. In this example here, that same type of report and information I can pull out of TANIUM for 0.5 megabytes. Again, that's one question on your endpoints that I'm asking, and I may ask more than once a day. And remember, you have hundreds of these questions being asked. So that is a significant amount of less data I am moving over the linear chain versus the legacy ways of doing it. So that is how TANIUM boasts and says they achieve incredible scale and performance by using their linear chain. So we thank you very much. This is Dan Powers at Sirius, and this was an IT Closer Look.